Hi, welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Katharine, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the year 2024. So, because I don't have all of these books physically on my shelves anymore, and then the ones I do have are scattered throughout my room, I'm just going to be putting all of the book covers on the screen here next to me, and you'll be able to see what they look like just from a picture. And I'm going to be using my phone to go on Goodreads to go over and recap all of the books that I read in 2024. So let's just get into this. I started my YouTube channel in August of 2024, so I don't have any reading wrap-ups from before August. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this video, because there are some books that I didn't get to talk about in reading wrap-ups last year, and I wanted to talk about those as well. And also, this kind of gives you a picture into what I like to read and what I don't like to read. One of the big lessons I learned in 2024 in terms of my reading is I'm steering more towards Christian fiction books and away from mainstream secular fiction books. That doesn't mean I'm completely getting rid of reading mainstream secular fiction books, but for the most part I'm switching to Christian fiction. But let's just get into what I read. I'm going to be mentioning these in the order in which I read them. I'm not going to go too in depth of what every book is about. I'm just going to mention the name, maybe a few short sentences about what it's about, and then the author obviously and my rating of the book. So let's just get into this. So the first book that I finished in 2024, I started it in December of 2023 but ended it in January of 2024, and that is the third book in the selection series called The One. It's by Kiera Cass. Essentially, what this series is about is this girl named America. It's a dystopian type world where it's an alternate United States, and basically this girl named America is entered into this competition essentially called the selection, and she's basically competing against these other girls in this alternate United States for the seat on the throne. She's competing for the prince's heart. His name is Maxon, and he is trying to choose his next wife, and also she would be the next queen as well. So essentially the third book in the series, called The One, is essentially just going deeper into the competition. What I like to call this series is basically a dystopian Bachelor book series. So think of the Bachelor TV series, just put it into a young adult book series and make it dystopian. That's literally what this series is. And I rated this book, called The One, 4 stars. And this whole series is really considered a 4-star series for me. The only reason why it wasn't 5 stars is because I'm not a huge young adult reader. I find them a bit immature, and I found the series as a whole to be a bit immature because it's really just about a bunch of teenagers in this Bachelor type competition. So there were some conversations and actions that were made that were a bit young adultish, if I can add that in there. But that's the reason why I gave it 4 stars, because there were some situations and actions done and words said that were very immature. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the series thoroughly, but I gave that book and the entire series 4 stars. And then the next book that I finished in 2024 was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This I gave, oh my gosh, did I really give it 3 stars on Goodreads? I'm gonna have to change that. I'm gonna give it 2 stars. Actually, I'm gonna change that right now, if I'm being honest. Yep, 2 stars, just changed it. So essentially, what that book is about is these two people, I believe it's a guy and a girl who met in college, if I'm not mistaken, and they go on vacation every year, and this particular book is about one of the vacations that they go on, and it's after like a couple years of them being like estranged. And I've realized that Emily Henry is like not for me. Later on in the year, I did read one more of her books, and I'll get to that, which really confirmed that she really isn't for me. I just found it to be very like smutty, and there was a lot of spice, and also the characters were just very shallow, and that's why I gave it 2 stars. The only reason why I gave it 2 stars instead of 1 star is because I could see other people liking it. Like, as a Christian, I just didn't feel right reading it, but I could see maybe someone who's not a Christian liking it. And then the next 2 books that I finished in 2024 were The Heir and The Crown, which are the 4th and 5th books in the Selection series. I don't think that they're a part of like the main trilogy of the Selection series, but they're essentially about the daughter of the main characters in the first 3 books. I gave them both 3 stars because I found that the daughter of the 2 main characters from the first 3 books to be very whiny and like pretentious and very entitled. And essentially the 4th and 5th books in this Selection series like is about the daughter going through her own selection. So she is going to become queen one day, and she has to like find a, husband for herself who will be the future like king consort. I think that's what it's called. But essentially she was just super whiny. I did enjoy the books for what they were. It's, essentially The Bachelorette in a dystopian young adult book. But she herself, like the female main character, was just a little bit insufferable. And then the next book that I read, 2 books that I read, I should say, because I read them alongside each other. I read Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which is the 5th book in the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. And then I also read simultaneously, just like I mentioned, like at the same time, I read Credence by Penelope Douglas. Please, if you're a Christian, don't judge me. This was before I started reading mostly Christian fiction. And this is before like I started getting convicted about reading mainstream secular fiction. So please don't judge me. This is like before I really made that switch. So Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, so the 5th book in the Harry Potter series, I gave 4 stars. This is essentially, I don't want to give too much away because it's pretty far into the Harry Potter series, but it's basically about the Order of the Phoenix, which is like a order or a group of people who are tasked to protect Harry Potter from Voldemort and the people trying to go after Harry and kill him. So that's that. I gave that 4 stars just because I felt it to be a little bit too long. Like it could have definitely been a shorter book, but overall I really enjoyed the book. And then Credence, that I read at the same time as the Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Credence is by Penelope Douglas, like I mentioned before, and this was by far the spiciest book I've ever read in my life. It's about this girl who had really famous parents, and they both die, and she is sent to her like step uncle's house to live with him and her like step cousins, and she had never known these family members that well. Like she knew about them, but like they never really had a relationship. But then she goes there, and it's Colorado, I believe, and they get snowed in for the winter. They like don't leave the house for like 6 months. And things happen, like very spicy, smutty things happen. I'm not gonna say because it's way too graphic, I should say. On Goodreads, I have it rated as 4 stars, but I'm gonna change it right now to 2 stars, just because of the fact that my taste in books has changed a lot in the past 6 months, so I'm gonna change that. And then the next book that I read was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I initially gave it 4 stars, but I changed it to 3.5 stars. I do enjoy Taylor Jenkins Reid's books. I read Daisy Jones and the Six by her, and I believe I also gave that like 3.5 stars if I'm not mistaken. But that was like 2 years ago, I think, almost 2 years ago that I read that, but I read One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid in 2024. I enjoyed the plot. So essentially it's about this guy and girl in high school who fall in love, and they end up dating, and they get married, move out to California, and they're originally from the Massachusetts area, which is funny because I'm from Massachusetts, so I noticed a few of the towns that they were mentioning. But that's besides the point. She's like a journalist, and I think they're both sort of like journalists in a way. And he ends up taking this like trip up to Alaska, and he's killed, or he dies in a helicopter accident. And she ends up having to move back home to Massachusetts from California because the grief is just like too much for her to bear on her own, like living alone in California. So she moves in back with her parents. And then she ends up getting in a relationship with like this other guy because she ends up like getting to a point in her grief stage where she feels ready to like be in another relationship. And then ends up that the guy that she was married to, who was supposedly killed in this helicopter crash, is actually alive. Like, he actually survived it. Like, he was the only one that survived. And he comes back to come, like, get her and, like, live the life that they were living in California. And she's like, and then she feels, like, stuck between these two people. And I'm not giving any spoilers, by the way. This is, like, all on the back of the book, like, in the synopsis. Like, you can go read that. So, but the majority of the book is her, like, trying to, like, choose between these two people. And it did have, like, some great themes in it. Like, there were some things that really resonated with me because some of the things that happen in both of these relationships happened to me in the relationships that I've had. So a lot of things that were said or done, like, really resonated with me. But it was kind of just, like, very average, except for those, like, few things that did resonate with me. But overall, it was just, like, an average read. Like, I would recommend it to people, but it's not, like, something that really impressed me or, like, went above and beyond that I, like, super enjoyed, if that makes sense. And then going to the next book that I read was Love and Gelato by Jenna Evans Welsh. I actually have a reading vlog on this book. I'll tag it down in the description below if you want to see, like, my full thoughts about it. But I gave it 3 stars. It was just, like, an average, like, young adult read. It's basically about this girl who her mom dies. She never really knew her dad. And apparently when her mom dies, she finds out who her dad is, and he lives in Italy. So she, like, goes from, I think, Washington State and moves to Italy to be with her dad. And it's just about her life. And, like, she finds, well, not finds, but her mom gives her this journal that the mom had when she used to live out in Italy, and how, like, she fell in love with her dad, with the main male character's dad, and, like, she's going around Italy, like, trying to discover all of these places and, like, where her mom visited and stuff like that. And then the daughter, who moved out to Italy with her dad, also kind of has her own little romance too. And it's a young adult book. I mean, obviously she's in high school, so it just made me kind of realize, and it made me start to recognize that I don't really like reading about high schoolers and just young adults in general. Like, I just feel it to be a little immature, and, like, especially when there's, like, a romance in it, I'm just, like, sort of disconnected from the plot and the characters at that point, because for those who don't know, I'm an aunt, and I have, even though I'm only 28, I do have nieces and nephews that are in high school. I was a very young aunt. I was an aunt at the age of 2. So that just goes to show like the ages at which my nieces and nephews are. So I do have nieces and nephews who are in high school. So when I read young adult books, or just books in general that have high schoolers in them, especially when it comes to their romances and their love lives, I'm like, this is kind of gross, to be honest, and I feel like a pedophile reading it, because I'm like, this could be my niece or nephew, and like what they're going through in terms of like their relationships, because a few of my nieces and nephews do have boyfriends and girlfriends, so it's weird to me to read romances with high schoolers, and it just feels wrong and icky to me. But anyway, the next book that I read was Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. This I gave 2 stars, and to be honest, I really want to change it to 1 star. I'm actually going to do that right now. I've been changing a lot of ratings on Goodreads during this video, but basically this book is about this girl who moves in with her brother because she's kind of like in this in-between time where she's, you know, a little bit working, a little bit going to school, and she just needs a place to stay, and her brother offers her a room because he has an extra room, and literally one of the brother's best friends, who like lives across the hall in this like apartment, ends up falling in love with this girl, the main female character, and Tate is the female main character in this book, and I just felt like Tate had like no self-respect for herself, because Miles is really just like a sex addict, if I can say that on here. I don't know if I can say that here on YouTube, but we'll find out. But anyway, he is like a sex addict. Like I went through a really traumatic thing in his past, which I understand. So he doesn't really want to get into like a committed relationship. So all he does is like want to have sex with Tate and like other girls. Like he's had, you know, sexual relations with other girls before Tate. And basically like Miles is just like very insufferable, has no personality, and just wants to use Tate, and then Tate just lets him do it and has like no self-respect for herself, and that's like basically the entirety of the book. Literally, that's it. So I'm giving it 1 star on Goodreads. I just did that, so I just literally don't recommend it to anyone. The only reason why I rated it 2 stars, maybe because I could see other people liking it, but now I'm thinking and I'm like, why would anyone like this? Like, it's basically corn, if you get my drift. And then the next book I read, I mentioned this a little bit earlier on in this video. It's Beach Read by Emily Henry. I gave this 2 stars, and I was very disappointed by this book because some of the people that I used to follow on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok for book content said that they loved this book and it's like their favorite book of all time. I no longer follow them, obviously, because I've obviously made a huge major switch from mainstream secular fiction to mostly Christian fiction, and this book is one of the many books that I read this year that kind of made me change my mind about that and make that switch. But basically it's about this girl who is an author, and her dad dies, and she finds out that her dad was having an affair, and that her dad, well, she already knew that her dad owned this beach house in Michigan, I believe, and essentially, like, growing up, she went to this beach house. So she ends up, after he dies, like, going to this beach house and just, like, trying to, like, figure out, like, how to sell the house, because, like, she doesn't want really any ties to her dad anymore after finding out that the dad was, like, cheating on her mom. So, like, she goes there to, like, write as well as, like, clear out all his stuff so that she can sell it. And then she ends up meeting, like, her next door neighbor, who is also another author, and it's just about, like, their love story, essentially. They make this pact because, first of all, in the beginning of the book, they don't really like each other. I wouldn't say that they were enemies, but, like, they just didn't like each other, and that was that. Like, they went to college together, and they were, like, nemesises. I think that's how you pronounce that. But basically, they were always, like, in competition with each other in college. They end up finding out that they're now neighbors, obviously, at this beach house thing, and they end up making this pact to write each other's like genres. Like, so she ends up writing like, I think, literary fiction, and then he ends up writing romance, but it's usually the opposite. And I just like found it to be very spicy, and also the characters had no personalities, and the plot was just like very mid. Like, nothing much was going on. Like, the premise sounded okay, but like when you actually started reading it, you're like, this is so boring. But then the next book that I read was Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. And I had read one other book by Christina Lauren before called The Unhoneymooners. And that's the book that actually got me into Book Talk, Bookstagram, BookTube, the whole like book community and watching book content and stuff like that. And the premise of The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren really intrigued me because the girl on Book Talk, so TikTok, but with book content, was describing The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren as if it was her own life. She was like, yeah, I am the maid of honor in my sister's wedding, and this food poisoning was going wrong on... What am I trying to say? So this food poisoning was going around at the wedding. Everyone got food poisoning except for me and the best man. So the honeymoon was unrefundable. So me and the best man just went on this honeymoon together without actually being the bride and groom. We were just, you know, the best man and the maid of honor, but we pretended to be, you know, married. And the premise of it sounded really good when she described it in that way, as if it was her own life. And then at the end of the video, she was like, oh, just kidding, this is actually The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. I read that and I gave that 2 stars just because, like, it just did not live up to the hype, and it was just very boring, and the characters had no personality. There was also, like, miscommunication and cheating in that book, and I don't like that in books at all. And I ended up giving that 2 stars. So I wanted to give her one more chance, and I read Love and Other Words, and it was so bad. I gave this also 2 stars because essentially it's about these 2 high schoolers who fall in love. This girl has this like other house, and the dad gets this house after the mom dies. And basically it's about this girl's romance with this next door neighbor at this like second house. And essentially this just further like made me not like books with high schoolers in it and reading about their romances. Like I mentioned before, I don't want to go into that rabbit hole again of explaining why I don't like that, but basically it's a dual timeline as well. It like switches from like their high school selves to like their late 20s selves. So I'm 28, so it was like them around my age, and essentially they don't talk for like 10 years. So like we're like going between these 2 timelines trying to figure out like why they didn't talk for 10 years. And the ending was just like so bad. Like, I don't know why this book gets so much hype, and like there was a lot of just miscommunication in this book, and Elliot, the main male character, is just very pretentious, and I just don't understand like the 10 years why they weren't talking. It was just like not justified in my opinion. It was just not a good book. I gave it 2 stars, but I could see why other people would like it. Same with Beach Read by Emily Henry. I was giving Emily Henry a second chance because, like I mentioned before, previously in the year I read People We Meet on Vacation by her, and I just didn't like that book. I gave that 2 stars, but I ended up giving Emily Henry a second chance by reading Beach Read. I gave that 2 stars again. So I'm not going to be reading any more Emily Henry books. I'm not going to be reading any more Christina Lauren books because I also gave her 2 chances. They were both 2 stars. I'm just not going to try again. And then the next book I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney. I gave this book 1 star. This was by far the worst book that I read this entire year. That I read in completion. Like, I did have some DNFs that I gave 1 star, but this was the 1 star that I read in its entirety. and I should have DNF'd this book, but I didn't know better because the reason why I gave it 1 star at the end, it was gonna be a 2 star, but then I gave it 1 star because, like, at the end of the book there were 2 things that happened. One being, like, they basically were talking about, like, supporting abortion, and then also they mentioned, like, supporting Palestine and, like, going to this Palestinian, like, protest, or, like, sort of Gaza Strip type protest where, like, they were trying to basically support Palestine and what they're doing. And first of all, abortion is murder, and I don't appreciate when people are in support of that just because it's literally killing a child in the womb. And second of all, I don't support Palestine whatsoever. Like, I believe Israel has every right to defend themselves against terrorists. Palestine has shown again and again, especially after October 7th of 2023, that they do not deserve my sympathy or anyone's sympathy, because literally they were asking for Israel to defend themselves. Like, they are terrorists, and they say that they want their own country, but that's not really the case. Hamas is an internationally known and recognized terrorist group, and they are in power, and they are essentially the government in Palestine right now. And anyone who doesn't speak out against Hamas, which is basically the entirety of Palestine, like, I have not heard one Palestinian speak out against Hamas or what happened on October 7th of 2023. And if you are still continuing to support Palestine and Hamas, I consider, like, you to be terrorist, or people to be terrorists if they support Palestine. But basically, I didn't appreciate those being mentioned in the book. I gave that 1 star for that reason. And also, like, I was gonna give it 2 stars initially just because, like, the main characters had no personality and the plot was just, like, nothingness. I could see maybe if someone liked those types of books, that's why I was gonna give it a 2 star, but, like, I ended up giving it a 1 star because at the end of the book they mentioned those 2 things, and I just didn't appreciate that. Not gonna read any more Sally Rooney books. I assume that her other books are similar in nature, so no thanks. And then the next book that I read was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, and this is a thriller book about this woman who, her husband dies, and she's an author, I believe, and she basically goes to this house on a lake, obviously, and basically it's a mystery book, as you can assume. Mystery, thriller, whatever you want to call it. Mystery, thriller, it's the same. Similar in nature, you know. And basically, it's literally all about her seeing these, like, weird things across the lake, hence why it's called The House Across the Lake. And she sees things through the window of this other house that she can see across the lake. I gave it 3 stars, like I mentioned, just because, like, it was very average and very mid. Like, I guessed the ending, and also, like, it was just very slow too. Like, the reason why I read it was because I was subscribed to Haley Pham. I no longer am subscribed to Haley Pham because she claims to be a Christian, but I don't think she's very, like, true to her faith. Like, I feel like she's very lukewarm because she reads a lot of books that, like, are very spicy and also that have, like, demonic undertones. And this also had a lot of demonic undertones. Like, one of the characters actually becomes possessed. And I felt really weird about that, and I felt, like, very dark after reading that, and it just felt like there was a cloud around me after reading that. And I just felt like Haley Pham, if she reads spicy books or books like this, it just makes me further think that she's, like, not a true Christian. So I read it because of her, because she, like, raved about this book, but I don't think I'm going to be reading any more of Riley Sager's books because apparently The House Across the Lake was supposed to be, like, his, like, most popular book, and I've only heard, like, mixed reviews about his other books, and I'm not really, like, enthralled enough in The House Across the Lake to continue reading his other books. And then the next book I read was Hands Down by Mariana Zapata, And I don't know why I even read this book. I actually got it from the Boston Public Library because I just wanted to check something out from the Boston Public Library when I did like a Boston trip. I actually did a reading vlog on this as well, so I'll tag that in the description as well too. I don't know if I can say as well and too in the same sentence. But anyway, I read Hands Down by Mariana Sabata and I gave it 2 stars. I ended up really just like skimming like the last like half of the book because I found it to be super repetitive. I also found it to be very drawn out, and the romance just was not romancing. I felt like they had like a brother and sister type relationship the whole entire time, and there were just not a lot of sparks or chemistry between the 2 characters. But then when they did get to like the actual romance part of it in the last like 5% of the book, it was all spice. It was all smut. Like literally like didn't feel any chemistry or sparks between the characters whatsoever. The characters also just had no personalities and the plot was just like nothing. It was just them like going to the grocery store or like filming YouTube videos for her YouTube channel for cooking, and that was like it. Or like going to the gym, and that was it. So the plot wasn't there. The characters didn't really have a lot of chemistry. The characters also had no personality whatsoever, and I just like didn't enjoy the book at all, really. And I also am not like a big sports romance person either, and that's why I was so surprised why I picked this up, because like I don't really like sports in general. Like I can follow along with sports. Like I grew up in a sports household. I played sports growing up. I can definitely like follow a football game. I can definitely follow a baseball game, but do I actively like search out like watching sports games on TV or like going to sports games? No. So why would I like a book about sports? I don't know. I'm not going to be reading any more of her books because all of Mariana Sabata's books are known for like being sports romances and also slow burn, and those 2 things just don't vibe with me. So goodbye Mariana Sabata and Hands Down by her. The next book I read was The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, and I gave this 4 stars. The only reason why I didn't give it 5 stars is because it did draw out a lot, and I also didn't feel like the narration style was my thing. It was told by death, if you can believe that. That's why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars. And it was just very like lyrical and poetic at times, like just the writing style. And that was another reason why I didn't give it 5 stars and gave it 4 stars, because the way it was written was kind of confusing like that, like being so lyrical and poetic. But overall, it was like a great book. I can see why it's considered like a modern classic. So essentially it's about this girl who her mom like gives her away, and she is like put into this like fostering family, and her brother had passed away like almost immediately, oh not immediately, like a couple days before she was put into this fostering family. So like when the foster family like only got her, they're like, where's the boy? Like we were expecting 2 children. And so it's basically like this girl's time in this foster family and dealing with grief, and also with her mom like giving her away. And also it's during World War II, and this takes place in Germany. So it's also about like the political and societal things that were going on during that time with Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and everything. And this foster family that she's with actually takes in a Jew and like hides him and everything. And so it's just basically about that. The ending is so sad. And there's also a movie about this. So if you've watched the movie, you know how sad it is. The movie also did not live up to the book. Like the movie does not compare. But anyway, if you've read the book or even watched the movie, like you know how sad this book is. But I gave it 4 stars like I mentioned. And then the next book I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I gave this 4 stars because it really confirmed like my love for magical realism and also for historical fiction, and it was just a great book. I would have given it 5 stars because it definitely gave me a 5-star feeling, but essentially it goes between two timelines. One is in the past in like the 1700s, and then the other timeline is like current times. I think it actually is in 2014. So it's semi-current. And basically, it's about this girl who's cursed for living forever, but with that curse of living forever and having eternal life, no one remembers her. So she'll have like an interaction with someone, but immediately as she walks away, she is forgotten. But the reason why it was gonna be a 5-star, but then I bumped it down to a 4-star. Sorry, I kind of got distracted there trying to describe the book for you, but the reason why I gave it a 4-star instead of a 5-star is because of the fact that it mentioned like LGBTQIA plus whatever else of the alphabet you want to put in there. And there was a friend group in this, which was like a part of like the main male character's friend group. And all of them, so there was 3 people in this friend group who were all in the LGBTQIA plus whatever community. And I just don't agree with that. Like, for me, as a person who's a Christian, I don't agree with that lifestyle. I have friends who identify in that community. I still love them. I just don't agree with their choices. But basically, it just gave me like a really bitter taste in my mouth because of that. And I also don't like how in the beginning of the book, like, she's cursed by a literal like God, but I really do believe that to be a demon, because he's like a god of the night, and like he is described in such a dark, sinister way. And so that's why I went from a 5 to a 4, is because of those 2 reasons. But overall, like, it did give me a 5-star feeling, so I would have given it 5 stars if it wasn't for those 2 things. And then the next book I read was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, and I really wanted to like this book, and I did. I actually really did like this book a lot. I gave it 4 stars. I originally gave it 5 stars, but I ended up giving it 4 stars because I didn't really appreciate, like, after I thought about it, I didn't appreciate how the main male characters treated the female main character. She basically is taken from the human world and taken to the fairy world because she kills this wolf who's actually a fairy, and it's just her life like in this fairy world. And it's a whole series. I'm sure you've heard of A Court of Thorns and Roses and the series, but I've heard that the series just gets spicier from here. Like, there was not a bunch of spice in A Court of Thorns and Roses, the first book that I just read, but I've heard it just gets spicier as the series goes, and I just don't want to continue on with that series, so I will not be reading it. And then the next book that I read was the first volume in the Remarried Empress series, and it's basically a manga series based on this woman who's an empress, and she's in this marriage with the emperor of this like fictitious kingdom, and basically she finds out that he has like a mistress and she wants to get divorced. And it's this whole series is just about her trying to navigate like her marriage with the emperor and then eventually wanting to get a divorce from him. But the first volume was like a 5-star for me, to be honest. It was great. It was my first manga series book that I've ever read, so that was really great to get into. And you'll see throughout the year that I read more from this series. But on to the next book that I read Verity by Colleen Hoover, and I should have just stopped at Ugly Love, but I decided to read another one of her books, which was stupid of me. I gave it 2 stars, and I did read it pretty fast. Like, it was very gripping. Like, I wanted to continue on with it, obviously. I read it in like 2 days. But essentially, it's her thriller book. I think she's only written 1 thriller, if I'm not mistaken, and I think they're making a movie about this. I do want to see the movie, just to see how it is, because I'm curious. But basically, it's about this girl, this woman, I should say, and her name is Verity, and she's an author, and she gets into this car accident, which basically leaves her like brain dead, and she's like essentially a vegetable. And her husband hires this other author to come to their house to continue writing the series for his wife, because she is obviously a vegetable now and can't continue to write. So it's just a very dark book about like how this author that was hired and comes to the house finds this manuscript, and this manuscript for this book that this author, who is now a vegetable, was going to write was basically about her life, and it was supposed to be like an autobiography of her life, and some very dark stuff is mentioned, and that's what like the thriller aspect of it is. Oh no, I have to turn on my fire again. Wait 1 minute. Okay, it's back on. But anyway, so there's just like a lot of dark things that are mentioned in this manuscript, and that's like essentially what the thriller is about. Whether or not like you believe the manuscript and what this woman is writing about her life, and just very dark. And I felt just much like the thriller that I read by Riley Sager, The House Across the Lake. I felt very dark. It felt like this cloud around me, and it felt very demonic. Even though there wasn't any demonic stuff like outright in Verity, it did feel demonic in the writing tone and just like in general, like the characters and the plot and stuff. Just very, it makes you want to shudder. Do you know what I mean? And that book actually made me stop reading Colleen Hoover, because that was like the final straw for me. Like that was the fourth book I read by Colleen Hoover, and I just don't want to read any more of her books. And then the next book I read was the second volume in the Remarried Empress series, and I gave it 4 stars. I gave the first book, the volume 1, 5 stars, but I gave this one 4 stars because I just realized that it was getting more political about like the different kingdoms in this like realm. And even though I still very much enjoyed the series and the book, it went into more politics that kind of got me confused a little bit, so that's why it was 4 stars. And then I next read Caraval by Stephanie Garber, and I gave this 3.5 stars. I initially was going to give it 4 stars, but after thinking about it, I bumped it down to 3.5, because even though I did enjoy it, it definitely felt very magical. By the end of the book, I was just very confused as to what was going on. I thought I knew what the plot twist was, and I was understanding what was going on. But then there was like another plot twist, I guess you would say, at the very, very end. So I thought there was a plot twist, but then there was like another plot twist. And that confused me even further, because I'm like, well, then what did happen? Like, what actually did happen? Because it's essentially, so this book, it's just in a series. So basically it's about this game called Caraval. And essentially people travel from all across these kingdoms to play this game, and it's basically a carnival type game, and it takes place over a series of days, and it takes place during the night, and basically you have to solve all of these riddles to, you know, win the game, and whoever wins like gets a wish. And so these 2 sisters actually are brought out to this game. They're invited. It's an invitation only game, so they're invited by the master of this game called Legend to play in this game. And essentially one of the sisters is like kidnapped, and the reason why I put it in air quotations is because if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. She's kidnapped, sort of, and the other sister has to basically find her sister in this game. And basically the sister who's trying to find her other sister who's like kidnapped, she wants to win the game so that she can wish her sister back. And it's just about that, and there's a little bit of romance in it, but like I mentioned, I gave it 3.5 stars. I was initially going to give it 4 stars because I did enjoy it. I didn't absolutely love it, but I enjoyed it. But then I bumped it down to 3.5 because like the more I thought about it, the more confused I was about the ending. And I didn't want to continue on with the series knowing that I would be confused even further. Like, if I didn't understand the first book, what makes me think I'll understand the rest of the books in the series? And this is supposed to be young adult. I don't understand with these young adult books being confusing. First of all, a lot of young adults are having more and more sexual content in it. More and more young adult books are having more violence in it. And thirdly, a lot of young adults are having more and more confusing plot lines in them. Like, me as a 28-year-old, why am I seeing graphic sexual scenes, graphic violent scenes, and also like confusing plot lines in young adult books? These are supposed to be fluffy, understandable, innocent reads. I shouldn't be reading about these types of things. Anyways, there wasn't really a lot of sexual or violent scenes in Caraval by Stephanie Garber, but it definitely was very confusing. Like, for a lot of it, was just very confused, but then when I finally did understand the plot and like the plot twist that happened at the very end, there was like another plot twist beyond the first plot twist that confused me even further, and I'm like, okay, then what was the real ending? Do you know what I mean? And so that's why I gave it 3.5 stars. Like, I do recommend it to people. Maybe someone would understand it more than I will, but I'm just not going to continue on with the series. The main reason why I wanted to read the Caraval series was because I wanted to get to the other series that she has called Once Upon a Broken Heart. I think that's what it's called. And I've heard raving reviews about that series, and it sounds like something I would be interested in. But after reading this book, which is supposed to be like the series before you're supposed to read Once Upon a Broken Heart, a lot of people say that you have to read the Caraval trilogy before reading the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. Like, I just don't see myself continuing on with the Caraval series or reading Once Upon a Broken Heart in that series, just because I just don't want to be confused any further. And it seems like also that the Caraval series and also the Once Upon a Broken Heart series has like similar plots to each other. And I'm just like, why are we retelling the same story but with different characters? So that's my take on that. The next book that I read was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I know it's Greek, so I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But I gave this 3 stars. It's essentially about this woman who is accused of murdering her husband, and after the murder she doesn't talk, and she's entered into like a mental institution, and this psychotherapist, I think that's what he is tasked to make her talk. And essentially it's just about that plot line. And I gave it 3 stars because I guess the ending. Simple as that. In this book, Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon, this was a 6-star read. It's essentially about this girl who, her name is Naomi, and she is headed out west on the Oregon Trail from Missouri to California, and she's not just going with her family, but she's going with a bunch of families. This is how they did the Oregon Trail. They had these things called wagon trains, and essentially all of these families, not just one singular family, would so it's like all of these families, like multiple families, would go out from like Missouri all the way out to either Oregon, Washington State, or California on the Oregon Trail. And basically Naomi meets this guy. His name is John Lowry, and he's half white and half Native American, and he is tasked with his uncle to lead this wagon train out to California. And it's basically the romance between Naomi and John Lowry, and also just like the historical aspect of, you know, what life was like during like the 1860s, during like the gold rush era of like people traveling out west on the Oregon Trail. And it was just like such a masterpiece. If you ever get the chance to read Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon, definitely go read it. I'm gonna definitely be reading more of her books. I think it's too soon to call her one of my favorite authors, but I can already tell that she will be if I read more of her books, and I hope so soon that I can do that. I had never heard of Amy Harmon before in my life before reading this book. I read it for a book club actually, so I probably wouldn't have ever heard of Amy Harmon. I mean, I probably would have at some point, but I am so grateful that it was recommended to me by the book club to read along with them, because now I will forever remember that book as being one of my favorite books of all time, and it's definitely a 6-star read, and I just can't wait to read more of her books. And how dare anyone not mention Amy Harmon to me before this point in time, because I blame you for not recommending Amy Harmon to me before I read Where the Lost Wander. But anyways, let's get on to the next book that I read. And I'm not, first of all, going to mention any DNFs that I didn't finish in 2024, because technically I didn't finish them. I did count them as like read on Goodreads, but I'm not gonna mention them here in this video because obviously I didn't finish them. The only reason why I marked them on Goodreads as like not finished, is so that I could rate them as 1 stars. That's my only reasoning behind that. I did mention my DNFs in like my reading wrap-ups, so if you want to see any DNFs that I had during any months, you can go watch those monthly reading wrap-ups. But anyway, the next book that I finished was the 3rd volume in the Remarried Empress series. Not going to go too much into that because I basically explained the premise of the book before, earlier on in this video, and also I don't want to give any spoilers, but I gave the 3rd volume 4 stars just because of the same reasoning behind the 2nd volume. I still am really enjoying the plot of this manga series at this point, but there were some politics mentioned that, kind of drew me back a little bit. I'm not too much into politics in books, so that was the only reason why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Gave this 3 stars just because I initially was going to give it 2 stars because, again, I don't like reading about high schoolers and their romances. It just icks me. It gives me the ick, I should say. I think that's the terminology that all these young kiddos are using. But anyway, I'm basically a kid myself. I'm only 28. But anyway, the only reason why I bumped it up to a 3-star, like I was saying, is for the pure fact that the whole premise of the book was about this girl who basically inherits this, like, fortune, like billions of dollars, and she comes from essentially nothing. So if any of you have like a rags to riches book that you can recommend to me, then that would be perfect, because I do like the general gist of books like that, but it was just very underwhelming though, like the whole book itself, because people hype it up so much. And I just didn't enjoy like the high school immatureness of it, and also like high schooler romances. I'm just not into it. It just grosses me out, like I mentioned earlier on in this video. So I will not be continuing on with the series. As you can imagine, it just was not for me. The next book that I read was Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, which is the 6th book in the Harry Potter series. I gave it 5 stars. It's obviously by J.K. Rowling. As you can already assume, I feel like a lot of people know that the Harry Potter series is by J.K. Rowling. And I, like I mentioned, gave it 5 stars because I felt really connected to the characters at this point in the book. And I also felt like the plot was pretty well paced. There was always something going on. And even though it is a chunky book, like I felt like I was entertained the whole entire time. And also, like, I just don't want to talk too much about this book, though, because I don't want to give anything away for you, but if you've read the book and watched the movies, I'm sure you know what this plot is about. The next book I read was Where the Road Bends by Rachel Fordham, and I was so excited to read this book because I was recommended this book by a Christian booktuber, and it was recommended almost as if it was very similar to Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. And for those who don't know, Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers is like one of my favorite books of all time. So I had really high expectations for this book, but it would just like came way under the mark. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, which isn't a bad rating. Like, I definitely understand where the Christian booktuber was coming from when she was recommending it to me for as like a very close plotline to Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. But I just feel like Rachel Fordham, when she was writing this book, Where the Road Bends, it was almost like a copy and paste. It was like a very mediocre version of Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. And there was just a very like eerie similarities between the two books. And I was like, does anyone have an original plot line at this point? Like, I feel like she was just trying to like reiterate or redo or basically copy and paste what Francine Rivers did in Redeeming Love and like put it in her book, in her own version. And I'm not gonna like go too much into to details of like what this book is about, just because I did have like this whole rant that I did during my monthly reading wrap up of November. So if you want to like see my full thoughts on it, like definitely go check out my November reading wrap up. But the back was just like the back of the book, the synopsis of the book was just very misleading. I had assumed that the majority of the plot was going to be about the main male character being injured and the female main character basically like aiding him back to health, but like that wasn't what it was about. And also I just felt like this book overall like didn't feel like it was taking place during the 1850s or 60s. So I don't think I mentioned it's a Christian historical romance. So it just didn't feel like it was historically accurate. I felt like the plot really could have taken place during like any time period. Like if you had just inserted the characters like into today's modern times, like I wouldn't have really even noticed a difference. It just felt like the historical things that were brought up felt very forced, and also because this is a Christian fiction book, I also felt like the faith aspects of this book were very forced as well, and there should have been more of it. I feel like there was very few Christian aspects to this book, but even like the Christian aspects that were in there felt very forced. And then also like one of the main driving plot points of this book was miscommunication, and I'm just not about miscommunication, so that's why that gave 3.5 stars. I gave that 3.5 stars instead of like a 4 or 5 stars. I enjoyed the book, okay? It's a good book and I would recommend it to people, but I would not mislead them in telling them that it's like Redeeming Love. Like it's similar to Redeeming Love, but it's not the same. It's similar but not the same. That's what I would describe it as. I would recommend it, but I would not be as misleading as I had once been misled. The next book I read was a Christmas book actually, and I was planning on reading this book for a book club, but I ended up not going to the book club. And it's called Better Watch Out by Natalie Walters, and it was a 3-star read. Like essentially it's about this girl who travels to New York City from, I believe, Georgia or like somewhere in the South, and it's her first time to New York City. She has this like bucket list that she wants to do because she has always wanted to visit New York City during Christmas time, and she was planning on meeting her boyfriend there. And she gets there, and like literally within the first chapter, like he breaks up with her because, again, miscommunication. Basically he had broken up with her like a year before, but she didn't realize that he was breaking up with her at that point. So this whole year she thought they were together, but they really weren't. So he broke up with her when she got to New York City, and he ends up getting engaged to this other girl, which is kind of a bad move on his part. But basically that was just like in the first chapter. That's not a spoiler, by the way, that's in the synopsis. Anyways, basically the majority of the book is about her trying to complete this bucket list, but her brother is in like the CIA, or he is in the FBI, something like that, and he tasks his friend to basically watch out for her while she's alone in New York City. And just knowing that this guy had dumped his sister and she just wants the friend to like look out for her. And this friend is like not in the FBI or like CIA, but like he basically is an ex-hockey player who works for like a private security firm, I guess, like basically like families and private companies and stuff like that hire this security team to like basically be their bodyguards and stuff. And basically this friend is like her private bodyguard during her trip to New York City, now that she's like alone and actually not with that ex-boyfriend. But yeah, it was cute. Like it had a lot of like romantic suspense in it as well, along with it being like a Christmassy book. Like I said, it's a 3-star. It was like just average, like it was a standard like Christmas book. It did have some faith elements because I believe Natalie Walters is a Christian fiction author. She writes primarily Christian romantic suspense. I definitely want to read more of her books because it definitely intrigued me enough to like want to read more of her books. I liked her writing style. But like I mentioned before, I'm realizing that I'm not like a huge like Christmas book reader. Like if I were to read Christmas books, it would have to be like a very well-known, beloved, popular Christmas book and or a Christmas classic book. I don't think that I'm gonna read more Christmas books like that, like where it's like a modern Christmas story, more like rom-com-y. Even though it's like not really a rom-com, it kind of gave off those vibes. I won't be reading like any more books like that. I mentioned me not really liking Christmas books in general for the most part, except for the Christmas classics and like well-known Christmas books in my December reading wrap-up. Go watch that if you haven't already. I'll tag that video down below. But the next book that I read was Happily Ever After by Kiera Cass. And if you remember at the beginning of this video, I read the Selection series by her. So basically this book, Happily Ever After by her, is a bind-up of all the novellas for the Selection series, and it gives basically like different perspectives of different characters throughout those books. Because in the Selection series, you're only getting America's point of view, which is the main female character, and then you're also getting the daughter's perspective as well. So you're only really getting like the female main character's point of views in those books. So it was really interesting to read about like the other perspectives during those books, and I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I gave it 4 stars, just like a lot of the Selection series books I rated 4 stars, just because I enjoyed it, and I really appreciated seeing the other perspectives of the characters because it gave me a better understanding of the story as a whole. And then the next book I read was Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I gave this 4 stars. Like I mentioned, I don't really like Christmas books, but I gave this a 4 stars because 4 stars is like basically the highest rating that I'll really ever give to a Christmas book. And if I give a 4 stars to a Christmas book, that means that I really liked it and enjoyed it and loved it actually. I just feel like with Christmas books, like it's hard to give 5 stars because like a lot of Christmas books, like as in like the description of what I'm talking about, they're about Christmas. They're very niche and they're very tuned into like the Christmas atmosphere. So like I feel like when a book is too niche, it almost like dilutes the plot, if that makes sense. Like the more detailed a plot or a book gets, the less I'm interested in it and the less I'm connected to it. I know when something's very, very niche, it's supposed to draw you in more to the book, but it almost does the opposite effect to me, where it draws me away from the plot. So I enjoyed it. I would reread A Christmas Carol because there were aspects and points to it that really resonated with me, and I could see myself rereading this every year to get me in the Christmas spirit. But yeah, that was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, 4 stars. And those are the types of books that I would probably read like going forward during the Christmas season, is like those types of Christmas books rather than like these rom-com-y fluffy type Christmas reads. And then the next book I read was the 4th volume in the Remarried Empress series. I gave this a 4 stars, much like a lot of the other books I rated in this series. I really, really enjoyed it. It was just the political aspect that gave me the desire to bump it down a star, because I'm not very much into politics in books. And then the next book I read was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It's the 7th book in the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. I gave this 4 stars because even though I did feel really connected to the characters and I was enjoying the plot, and the ending of the series, the Harry Potter series, really wrapped up well, I just felt like J.K. Rowling stuffed a bunch of things into this book, and I feel like it felt very rushed and very condensed, and I would have loved to have seen this in 2 books. They made the movies in a part 1 and a part 2. Why couldn't they make the book into a part 1 and a part 2? It just like was a lot of information in one book, and I understand it had to be that way because she was ending the book series, but that's why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. And then the next book I finished was Waiting for Christmas by Lynn Austen. Again, I gave this 3 stars because it was just like an average Christmas read. It basically is a Christian historical fiction Christmas book. Lynn Austen is a very popular Christian fiction author, and I want to read more of her books. This definitely did not deter me from reading more of her books. I haven't read any of her books before this. This is my first book by her. But essentially it's about this boy who is an orphan, and he shows up on this married couple's porch in the year 1901, and basically he asks this married couple to help him find his sister because his sister and him were separated, and usually during that time period brothers and sisters were not separated and they were not put in separate orphanages. They wanted to keep siblings together, and the whole reason why they're in an orphanage is because the mother dies and the dad is out on this like cargo ship, like basically working on this shipping ship, this cargo ship is what I'm trying to say. So basically the policemen just see that the mother's dead without the father being there, so they believe that the father's like not in the picture. So they take these kids and they put them in different orphanages. So it's basically just about that storyline of them trying to find the sister and also wait for the father to come home. The boy who is the orphan like mentions that the father said that he would be home by Christmas, so they're just like waiting for Christmas for the father to come home. But it was an okay book. It definitely was like a very wholesome read, but I just felt like the historical and the Christian aspects of this book were very forced. I felt like it could have taken place during modern times, the way that the story was told, and it just wasn't giving what I was expecting it to give in terms of like a Christian historical fiction. But I'm glad I read it. I don't know if I'll reread it, but I definitely recommend it to people if they want to read like a Christian fiction Christmas read. I enjoyed it. It was very wholesome like I mentioned before, but it's not what I was expecting necessarily. It was a little bit underwhelming to what I wanted it to be. And then the next book that I completed this year was The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox. I gave it 2 stars because I felt like it was just like a tacky rom-com version of the Parent Trap movies. I know there's 2 versions of those movies. There's like one from like the 60s or 70s, and then there's one with Lindsay Lohan. I personally prefer the one with Lindsay Lohan, but basically The Holiday Swap is about these identical twins, and they're like around my age. They're like in their late 20s. One is a celebrity TV host, and she's a baker, and she hosts like a bunch of like different like baking shows. And then the other sister is a baker in her hometown at her family bake shop, and essentially they switch places because they're both kind of having troubles in their own lives. So they switch, kind of trying to take each other's places to see if that would solve their issues, which first of all I have an issue with because I feel like that's very immature. Like I understand like in the Parent Trap movies with like Lindsay Lohan, like they're children, so like I expect them to make those types of decisions, and that's how I justify that, is because they're children, and children oftentimes make immature and stupid and foolish decisions, like switching places, especially if you're identical twins. But like, you're in your late 20s, like, why are you doing that? Like, I would expect them to do that if they were, you know, in elementary school and they wanted to pull like a prank on a teacher or something. But first of all, that's the first issue that I had with it. And second of all, I feel like they just didn't know how to communicate whatsoever. For example, like, when they swap places, they end up falling in love with these people, these men, and they end up leading these guys on to think that they're like the other sister, when in fact that they're the other sister. Do you know what I'm talking about? They basically lead these men on to think that they are the other sister. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but they have this like internal battle, like the both of them have this internal battle of like, well, I need to tell them that like I'm not actually my sister, I'm actually the switched sister, the swapped sister. And but then they go into this thing where like, no, I'm too scared, I'm not going to tell them. And I'm just like, between those two things of like them swapping in the first place, which is immature, and second of all, the miscommunication, which is also another immature thing to do, I just did not like the book. And also, like, the book itself like didn't really feel Christmassy at all unless they mentioned Christmas. By that time, when they did mention it though, it felt very forced, so I didn't appreciate that. So I gave it 2 stars. I only gave it 2 stars because the fact that I could see other people maybe liking it if they like fluffy type books like that. I would have given it a 1 star, but I gave it a 2 star for that reason, that I could see other people liking the book. But the last book that I read this year, or in the year 2024, I'm filming this in 2024 at the very end, but you're seeing this in 2025. But the last book that I read in 2024 is Bridge to Haven. Another 5-star book. I really loved this book. It's by Francine Rivers. Francine Rivers is literally just like on another level of writing. Like, she just writes such great books. This is a Christian historical fiction book. It has a little bit of romance in it, but it's like not the main point of it. And essentially, it takes place in the 1950s, and this girl named Abra is basically born under a bridge in this town called Haven, which is in California, and that's literally why it's called Bridge to Haven. It's very literal, but it also takes other liberties. Like, the Bridge to Haven is also like another, it's not just literal, like the Bridge to Haven, because she was born under a bridge in Haven, but Bridge to Haven also has other meanings because of the plot of the book. I think it's called a double entendre. I'm learning that term. I think that's what that is. It's literal, but it also has other meanings throughout the plot of the book. A double entendre. Anyways, it's basically about this girl named Abra who's born underneath a bridge and is like basically left there to die by her mom. And basically, it's about her life. You see her grow up, and she is found by the pastor in this town called Haven in California underneath this bridge, and this pastor and his wife basically take care of her up until she's like 5 years old, and the pastor's wife passes away, so the pastor has to make the hard decision to let this other family adopt her, because that family has a mother and a father, and the pastor thinks it's really important for Abra to grow up with a mother and a father figure. But essentially, Abra, when she's like a teenager, runs away because she never felt like she was enough. She ends up becoming like this famous Hollywood actress, and it's essentially about her life as a Hollywood actress. Like, the majority of the book is about her doing that, and she just feels really lost, and the whole reason why she ran away in the first place is because she never felt like she belonged anywhere. So it has a lot of great Christian theming in this book, and it's basically about Abra finding her true identity in Christ. And it's such a beautiful story of like redemption and the love of God and truly seeing how God sees you, and I really enjoyed the book. But yeah, those are all the books that I read in the year 2024. Thank you so much for watching. I know this is a longer video, so I appreciate you watching until the end of this video. If you watched until the end of this video, please leave a book stack emoji in the comments below, and I will see you in another video. Like, comment, and subscribe. Do all the YouTube things that you know how to do, and I'll see you soon. Bye!